here with Coach L. Man, thank you so much for being here, dude. I'm pumped about this.
What's up, Micah? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So for those of you that don't know Coach L, he's about to give the introduction of a lifetime. And look, for all these you guys listening, I'm going to be honest. Coach L has been my coach for the past 2 years, and I've enjoyed, or not enjoyed, every second of it. But it's been one of the most amazing things that I've done for myself, both mentally and physically. So anyways, with all that being said, thanks for being here. I would love for you just to introduce yourself, let the good folks listening know, who you are, man.
Yeah, my name is Elkanah Senouvor. I was born in Ivory Coast, which is in West Africa. Moved to America when I was 12. I started coaching. I started fitness coaching since 2011, and I kind of started just teaching boot camps. I went to a tire shop, bought a bunch of tires, bought a bunch of bands, and then I passed out like 1 million flyers, and then I was able to get like 30 people to come do a boot camp with me. And that kind of started my fitness career. From there, I went into personal training, eventually ended up at a CrossFit gym. The CrossFit gym that I was coaching at, they ended up having a team go to regionals, which was in 2014. From there, I kind of just started working with a few of the athletes, and then it kind of led me into more working with people one-on-one. And then fast forward 3 years later, started working with Brute and been doing that since.
And really that's where we are now, right? So you're a one-on-one coach with Brute. Speaking of athletes, you've had several of them go to the CrossFit Games. Just the short list I have, and you fill in the blanks, is Mia Nightingale, Ryan Sowder, which a lot of folks may have heard of. He's doing well this year as well. You've had the Brute team that you coach, and all really successful runs by those athletes. Is there anybody else that I left out of that category?
From 2018, no, but for this year, I have Dariana Rosales, Chloe Honaker, and then I have another team that's competing at West Coast Classic, hoping to make it to the games.
The Ohio Brutes.
Yes, the Ohio Brutes.
Good humans. I mean, they being Brute, do they just give you the teams? They're just like, L's the team guy?
No, I think that I think everyone's seeing how well the Central Beasts did, kind of made the Ohio Brutes kind of reach out. So I didn't start working with any of them until right after the games.
Wow, I didn't know that story. So they reached out to you.
Yep. The first one was Aaron, and Aaron kind of put the team together, and then I eventually started coaching everyone, which is kind of how it tends to happen. It's I work with one athlete, they want to go team, and kind of as the other athletes see how well that one athlete is doing, and then that kind of gets them on board to having me coach the whole team.
So was 2018 the first time that, obviously I get that list there. Was that the first time that you had athletes go to the CrossFit Games?
Yes. That was the first year I had athletes go to the CrossFit Games.
So in that moment, and I was listening to and hopefully I'm not butchering this, it's the Mobility Athlete Radio podcast that you're on.
Yep.
Hopefully that's the name. Anyways, it's a great podcast. You should go listen if you're interested more in Coach L. You mentioned something very interesting on that podcast. You said something to the effect of that when you took athletes to the game, it was the first time, and you said, I'm not going to the games unless I'm competing or unless I'm coaching someone, which I agree. You ain't there to spectate. Let's go, somebody. You said in a way there was this feeling of inadequacy. I'm curious to hear and then you go on to talk about the imposter syndrome, and we'll get into that. But I'm curious to hear like your perspective of a coach. First time, I can only imagine as an athlete, right? But the first time taking athletes to the CrossFit Games, this huge test, and you go, "Oh shit, this is real now." Was there ever that moment for you?
Not really for me, because I'm confident in my abilities, and the best thing about this is I have like a lot of resources that I can rely on, right? So I think if I was coaching on my own and I didn't have a team that was helping me, I probably would have had more of those feelings. But I have Nick as a resource that I can reach out to, Nick Fowler, and he's coached many athletes to the CrossFit Games, some of the best athletes in the sport. So just having him as a resource, and he was helping me a ton with the team, especially. Just a lot of it was how to manage people. We think that programming is the most important aspect, but one of the bigger lessons I learned in 2018 was you have to be able to manage 4 different personalities, right? And that's, if you can get 4 people on the same page and you get them to have the same vision, it makes your job a lot easier.
So let's rewind. We talked about 2018, but prior to 2018, I mean, there were, of course, endless hours of work, not only by those athletes, but you as a coach, and kind of getting into lifting the hood up, if you will, and looking at the kind of the athlete, we'll call it the athlete development process, or maybe from your side of it, the coaching process. And of course, we're going to get back to these athletes and get back to the games, because I know that's sexy. That's what people want to hear. But I mean, it just is. It's what sells clicks and subscribes, and I mean, it just is, you know. But
Sure.
No, it is like. But I think people can get a lot of value, even if they're not with a one-on-one coach. Plug, you should be with a one-on-one coach. If they're not with a one-on-one coach, I'm just curious. Walk people through maybe the process. Your process of going, okay, I'm interested. I raise my hand. Okay, talk through that. What does that look like? What can people expect?
Yeah, so athlete reaches out. They want to start one-on-one coaching. The very first step is just to have a conversation, right? And it's that first conversation is just to see if we would match well together, if we would be a good fit. Because I think earlier on, I just wanted more clients, so I just took on everyone. And I think now I'm a little bit more selective about who I work with. And sometimes it's just a matter of like, you're not going to be able to work with everyone, and not everyone's going to be a good fit. So that first conversation kind of determines that, gets the process rolling. After we have that first conversation, we basically talk about everything from what does your life look like? What are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? What have you done in the past athletically? What do you kind of struggle with as an athlete? Like, why are you reaching out for help? What are you mainly trying to change about your life? Once I have those questions answered, it kind of just gives me a picture of like who I'm dealing with, and kind of what the process is going to look like. For most athletes, after that conversation, it starts with testing. We do about 2 weeks of testing, depending on the athlete. Some athletes have shorter testing. Depends on the time of the season. Obviously, if someone is about to go do this major competition, I'm not going to disrupt their training and put them through testing. But the testing is helpful in helping me figure out like what their weaknesses are. And most of the assessments that we do are single modalities, just to see like where you are with each characteristic. So there are some mixed modal tests in there, but for the most part, they're single modalities. Once I have those testing metrics, I'm able to compare those metrics with thousands of other athletes and kind of figure out what their true weaknesses are. From there, we start training. Typically do 4 to 6 week cycles to kind of make sure that we can put enough progressions, but also to make sure the cycles aren't too long and to allow time for athletes to deload, recover, and then kind of reassess their priorities as we go through the process. And that's pretty much the process. I have a pretty open line of communication with all my athletes. Everyone has my cell phone number. It's pretty easy to reach me. So it makes it's when you're getting a coach, you're not just getting programming. You're basically guided through the process.
Seeing, you talked about those test results, seeing, like you said, thousands of test results. Is there a common theme or maybe thread that you see amongst all of those? Because I don't know the answer to this. This is not a rhetorical question. I actually don't know the answer to this, so this is fun. What do you see? I'm curious.
Yeah, so from the testing result, like the overlying question I'm trying to answer is, are you strong or are you aerobic, right? So people typically tend to fall within those two realms. And you can kind of look at it based on what they've done in the past. Like if I have somebody that played football and they've done strength training since they were 13 and they've been lifting since they were 13 and now they're 25, I guarantee you they're probably very anaerobic and very powerful and strong, right? So that for me, that means that I need to develop their aerobic system.
Right.
And you have people that in nature are just a little bit more aerobic than they are strong. I would say most people are more aerobic than they are strong. And most of the people that I get need to get stronger and they need to build strength. And that's kind of the biggest weakness I kind of see with the athletes that I work with.
Now, just to set the stage, with these athletes, are they coming to you with, hey, here's the age-old question, right? Is it sport or is it for health?
Most people are coming for sport.
Okay.
Yeah. Most people are coming for sport. Yep.
Okay. Right. And so for those listening, obviously for sport, it's, ultimately about maximizing your potential to do the best to win in the sport, right? Whereas health, it's like, hey, we want to feel good and live good, and sometimes those things get, not that they need to be overlooked, but not every day is going to feel good in the gym. We'll just leave it at that. Ultimately, and it's a balancing act of pushing and pulling of how far do I go? And so I'm curious, how do you balance that with your athletes of, hey, you need to get stronger, because we'll just use that example, but hey, coach, I want to be better in the sport of CrossFit. Like, how do you create that buy-in where people go, oh, getting me stronger is going to, because I just think about like when I started, like I didn't see the correlation, and I have to think I'm not alone. Most people probably go, how is this that doesn't look like CrossFit going to help me in the sport of CrossFit? Right?
Yeah, for sure. So the easy thing is everyone likes to lift weights, right? So it's, for the most part,
it looks good on Instagram.
Yeah, like you don't have to try too hard to convince people to do more lifting to get stronger. I think the hardest part about coaching people is basically Instagram, in my opinion, right? So people just look at Instagram and they see what other people are doing, and they may have like a relationship with who they're looking at, or they may know a little bit about them, and they go, okay, if that person's doing that, I'm trying to get to where that person is. I should be doing similar things than that person is. when in reality, it's a lot more complicated than that. Because you're getting a small glimpse into their training, right? Like you're not getting all of the training. You don't know that that person did a million snatch pulls, a bunch of snatch deadlifts, 5 sets of 15 back squats right before they posted that Metcon. So you just see the Metcon and you're like, okay, that's what I need to do with my time. That's the first thing. The second thing is with a lot of my athletes, right? Like the biggest struggle is time. That's the biggest difference between the people at the top of the leaderboard and the people trying to get there. If you look at a week of training and you have 12 hours of training that you can do total for the entire week, right? We could spend that amount of time, those 12 hours, we could spend 6 of it doing conditioning and working on stuff you're already good at, or we can really prioritize and spend like 9 hours working on it and then maybe 3 hours working on your conditioning. So it's just a matter of prioritizing like time. And once I'm able to explain to them like why we're doing so much of it, and that once we get closer to competition, things are basically going to flip. You won't always be lifting this much. You'll be doing more like what the sport looks like the closer it gets to competition. But even that process goes for every single sport. It's just called periodization. So you work on more general things the further away you are from competition. So you work on your skills, you get stronger. You don't do a lot of the sport. The closer you get to the season, that's when your training starts to look more like the sport. And then you dial back all the strength work, all the skill work, basically. And you start practicing your sport the closer you get to competition.
You mentioned Instagram. I want to touch on this for a second. It may be my soapbox of this podcast. Could be. I don't know. We'll see. Do you think that Instagram creates we're not going to say all athletes, we'll just say in the folks that you coach in the microcosm, right, that it creates a feeling of inadequacy and even imposter syndrome?
Yes, 100%. I think some people struggle with it. I won't say everyone does, but it's really easy to compare yourself to what you're seeing, right? And if you're constantly seeing people hitting PRs and showing that they're getting better, and then you compare it to yourself and you're sitting there and you're just putting in the work every day, right? Like you're just putting in the work. It can kind of make you question whether you're doing the right things, right? And it's part of it, but I think it's really important to just understand that Instagram is basically a highlight reel. No one posts all of their training on there, or no one displays like all of their struggles and failures. So to look at that and to compare to your entire life, it's definitely like, it's a trap basically, and it doesn't lead to good things. I think a good way to look at Instagram is to go, okay, most of the top athletes are snatching 275 to 285. You can make a connection that if you want to get to that level, you should be snatching 275 to 285. But that's as far as you can go as far as like comparing yourself to people on the internet. It just gives you a general idea of like what you should be working towards.
Do you feel that in your coaching process, are you combating that a lot with your athletes? And if so, how do you deal with that? I mean, because we live in a social media world, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think it's more the younger people that I work with. I think they struggle with it more than the older, more mature athletes, because I think part of maturing is like realizing that this is like your journey, and you're not doing it for other people, and you can be happy for those other people getting better. Not saying that the younger people aren't happy for those people, but
Sure.
the less confidence you have in yourself, the more you're going to have that feeling of inadequacy, basically. But I think most of my athletes are pretty confident in their training. I would hope so. So I don't have too many of those conversations. And usually when I do, it's a good place to grow from.
So speaking of growth and the qualities that bring on growth, what are you looking for quality-wise? Like, what in your mind, when you look at the qualities of an athlete, you go, hey, this person has elite potential. And I know the word potential is kind of ethereal in nature, and no one can really tap into it because technically potential is limitless. Because you could go on and on. But I'm just curious for you, what do you see as you've coached a lot of those people and had success with a lot of those people, and they've had success under you? What do you think that is? What do you think those qualities are?
The first quality I look for is how much time do you have, right? Like
Really?
beyond training. It's simple. If you're trying to be one of the best athletes in the world, you can't have an 8-to-5 job or a 9-to-5 job. It's almost impossible. Not saying you can't participate in the sport and compete and do well, but it's becoming increasingly harder to compete with someone that is training 3 sessions a day and is training for 8 hours a day, and you're doing your 3-hour session. You're just not going to catch them. I think that's the first quality I look for is how many resources do you have? One, with time, and then as well as, like, it's expensive being an athlete. Like, all the food that they have to eat, the quality of food that they have to eat. Like, athletes are making a lot of sacrifices to reach those goals. So that's the first thing I look for. If someone comes to me, if I have someone with less experience in the sport that has the ability to train for 6 to 8 hours a day, not even, I'll take 5 to 7 hours a day, and then can have a job that isn't as demanding, meaning they don't need to put a lot of mental thought, they're not under a lot of stress. I'll take that athlete over someone who has a lot more potential but can only train 2 hours a day. So that's the first thing I look for. The second thing is, this is an endurance sport. People focus a lot on how much stronger the athletes in the sport are getting. But I think at the end of the day, like when you're doing the open, there's only one strength workout, and there's the rest of them are more conditioning in nature. So if someone has a really developed aerobic system, that's the first thing that kind of gets me excited. And then if they have a base of strength that comes along with it, even better.
So what I'm hearing is,
quit your job.
if you could, for all of you listening, please put in your 2 weeks notice. You have aspirations of becoming a games athlete.
But you don't hear many of those, right? Like, you don't hear, I train for 6 hours a day, then I go to my job for 8 hours, and then I come back and I train some more. Like, I don't think you could find an athlete that finished top 20 at the games that was still working full time.
So do you think then that is a result of the sport not being professionalized?
Partially. I mean, there's not enough money invested in the athletes yet, right? Like, it's more than it was in the past, and it's growing, and it's going to get better. But right now, if you look at the athletes if you look at the quarterfinal leaderboard, the athletes like 100 through 500,
Mm-hmm.
I'm almost certain you would find a lot of them weren't able to have training as their number one priority. And that may be why they fell short.
As in, they simply don't have the time to allocate, is what you're saying.
Yes. I think talent matters and potential and all that matters. But for the most part, I think that's the biggest difference between finishing 400 and finishing top 100.
And in your mind, it's a minimum of, we'll say, 5 to 7 hours a day.
I think being able to do a 90-minute session in the morning and then a 3 to 4 hour session in the afternoon is important. But not only the training is the stress that a job requires. Like, you know, you go to work every day. Like,
Yeah.
you probably don't notice the stress, but it's there. It's happening.
Yeah.
I think stress is probably one of the things that slows down adaptation just as much as sleep and nutrition. I think stress has just as big of an impact on adaptation as those two things.
It's such a hard pill to swallow, right? No, I mean, it is, right? Because you've got people, I mean, seriously, you've got people that are training hard, right?
Right.
But it's, you know, and I don't want to take anything away from their 90-minute, 2-hour session, but it's like, if you want to not stay where you are, if you want to gain ground, you've got to do what the people are doing that are gaining the most ground.
Right. I think I'm definitely not telling people to quit their job and like put all their eggs in CrossFit and then they're gonna make it. Because even if some people, you could have 10 hours a day to train and you still wouldn't be good enough. Which is
harsh reality of life.
Right, which is even tougher pill to swallow. But I think if you think about it like this, if you finish 1,000 in the world after the quarterfinals, and you're trying to get to top 300, right? Like, let's say that's your goal for the next year.
Mm-hmm.
You have to work harder and train more than everybody that finished in front of you. The closer you get to the top, the harder it is.
Yeah.
Because you have more people that have the ability to
do that,
to train more than you.
In your coaching process, how do you, because obviously you have athletes right now that made it to, you know, they were in the quarterfinals, they were top 1,000, just like the profile, the avatar you just gave, looking to crack the top 500, 300. What does that conversation look like? And you kind of let us in there about, you know, being realistic about time, but how do you manage those expectations? Next question. Then how do you go about actually developing that athlete towards the next stage? And if you want to create an avatar to make this simple for the sake of conversation, but I think people listening could really learn a lot from this, and kind of that process, your coaching process.
Yeah. So I've actually had a lot of conversations about just how much you have to train and the requirements. Take Ryan Sowder, for example. Like, Ryan made it to the games working a full-time job. And like people don't know that, but in order for him to get in the top 10, he would need to like not have a job and be able to train more. Even this year, he's on duty right now. He's on military duty, so he's working about 10 hours a day. And there's honestly like nothing he can do with that. So it's really a matter of getting very, 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 very specific with the things we're training and like really, really dialing in on weaknesses, right? So let's say he has like 5 things that he needs to improve on. We're going to say screw those other 4 things, but we're going to really, really focus on that one thing. That's going to make the biggest difference for him. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the approach that we take. The more an athlete can train, the more weaknesses you can work at a time, the less availability they have. We have to get really, really specific as far as improving those weaknesses.
So let's take Ryan, for example, then, since we're on the topic. And granted, you don't have to share, obviously, since he's currently competing, you don't have to share actual weaknesses. But how would you structure that? Like, let's get into a little bit of the nitty gritty here. How would you structure that for someone like him, as far as training goes?
Yeah. So he actually got injured during the quarterfinals and really couldn't finish even the quarterfinals. And one of Ryan's bigger weaknesses was upper body muscle endurance. It was upper body muscle endurance and rowing particularly that have been kind of the bigger weaknesses for him. So if I'm trying to improve those 2 characteristics, and let's say he has about 2 hours to train every day, that means on Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, I'm going to work on upper body muscle endurance, right? And basically, I'm just going to do upper body splits on those days. So on Monday, he's going to do split jerk. Then he's going to do some heavy strict presses. Then I'm going to have him do EMOMs of strict handstand push-ups, ring dips, and dumbbell strict press. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to take a different approach and get a little bit more dynamic. So on Wednesday, I'm going to have him do split jerk again. Then he's going to do some behind the neck SOTS presses. That's going to improve his snatch positions at the same time. And then for his conditioning, I'm going to have him do 3-minute AMRAPs for 5 sets, where he has to do 5 kipping handstand push-ups, 10 toes to bar, and 30 double unders. Rest 2 minutes times 5. And then on Saturday, I'm going to really challenge him on Saturday. So I'm going to give him a really tough EMOM that has straight handstand push-ups, power jerks, heavy power jerks, toes to bars, pull-ups, and just make him work on sustaining those efforts for 20 to 30 minutes. So that's one way I would approach it. But keep in mind that this is my 3rd year working with Ryan. At the beginning, it would look a lot more simple than it is now.
And when you say simple, and I don't want to reduce what you're doing because I want to make sure people understand this. Simple, you're talking really just accumulating volume. Exactly. In a very controlled manner. Is that what you mean by simple?
Yep. Nothing dynamic. He's getting full recovery between efforts. He's not doing a lot of work under fatigue. Just really working on developing his positions. Probably a lot more bodybuilding than gymnastics. At the beginning is kind of how we started.
There are these people out there, and Some call them purists, some call them crazy, some call them genius. I don't know. I'm curious to hear your perspective on this. That their MO is you get better at the sport of CrossFit by doing the sport of CrossFit. What's your reaction to that statement?
I agree with that within reason, right? I think it depends on the athlete. One thing that people have to understand, like every athlete is different. You're going to have some similarities, but for the most part, people's training age are different. People's DNA is different. The stuff that they did when they were younger are different. The genes that their parents passed on to them are different. So you can't just have one way of attacking it for everyone. I'll give you a specific example, one that we've talked about as coaches, right? So let's say I have an athlete, right? And for the most part, if you're a female and you're trying to compete, you should have about a 220 to a 230 clean, right? And she's right at 212, right? But she's very aerobic. That clean is probably her biggest weakness. So in order for me to take her clean from 212 to 220, which is the minimum requirement, if she's truly aerobic and she's very close to her potential, which again, we don't know what the potential is.
Right. It's limitless.
It would take me, like, let's say it would take me 3 years to get her from 212 to 220, right? And she has to do a lot of work, a lot of strength training. And it's just really, really grindy, heavy stuff, right? Takes a lot out of her nervous system. For me to waste 3 years to add 8 pounds to her clean would be a waste of time, right? And it would kind of take her away from her potential in the sport. It would be better if I spent less time working on that clean to add 8 pounds to it. I could use that time to train on other characteristics and just improve her metabolically. But I don't know that her potential is 220, right? So It's a matter of constantly reevaluating what you're doing. If you're working on progressions and you're changing them up every couple of weeks, and as coaches, we look at what works. If it's working, keep doing it. If it's not working, try something else, right? It's the best way to go about it. And if you're constantly self-auditing yourself and that person's not getting strong, maybe they're very close to their potential. And it doesn't matter what you do. You just have to know how long is long enough that you've worked on something before you're happy just maintaining 212. But now her Fran time goes from 230 to 210, right? Like that's a big improvement. Or her Karen time, she goes from doing 100 to now she can do all 150 unbroken, right? Like she can make all those metabolic improvements because we're not spending all that time working on that clean.
That's such a... I think that is the number one reason to get a coach, to have someone that is objective, not subjective, objective, or as they can be in their approach to, ultimately assess and reassess and reassess and reassess and give this objective feedback. Because as athletes, and anyone listening to this that's an athlete, I'm sure most are, right, to some extent, we're not objective. If we were left to our own devices, most of you, including myself, would do what we want to do. And we would avoid the things we're bad at, because it's called human nature to do that. It's not just with fitness, it's everything, right? And to have someone that comes in and goes, hey, your upper body, we'll take Ryan, your upper body endurance is not where it needs to be. Okay, well, if you're not good at it, the likelihood of you wanting to actually do that is, I don't know, unlikely. I think that is the number one thing. Like for everyone listening, I don't know, maybe it just seems like a so no-brainer to me. I mean, right? I mean, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but that seems like what I'm gathering.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people, I think the message that we give out as coaches is what dictates if an athlete resonates with it. And most athletes, they want to do what who they're trying to be like is doing. And I think that's just a natural instinct. Like if you see someone and you want to be like them, you want to do what they're doing, and exactly that. So a lot of people will go to CompTrain or Misfit. Not saying anything's wrong with those programs. Like they've gotten a ton of people better on those programs, right?
Of course.
But is it the best programming for someone who has 2 hours to train a day? Like most of those programs are trying to work on a vast difference of characteristics that may not be what you need to work on, but you're going to work on them anyway because it's part of the programming. When in reality, you need to be spending more time working on your ankle mobility, improving your pistols. By improving your pistols, now you have a better snatch receiving position. Now your snatch is better, right? Like people don't realize like how much good you can do to yourself if you really fix that one major weakness that you have.
Oh man, this is so good. I could go on for hours talking about this. It's like, oh man, it's like people are trying to, oh gosh, people are trying to fix the little, the little sink in their little drip, but really the problem is the well. The problem is the well, people. Go to the well. My gosh, it gets me fired up. Anyways, I don't. Okay, as we're wrapping up here, I want to read you a quote. And it's from Ryan Sowder. And Brute is actually doing a cool thing where they're releasing the 4 weeks leading up to the games of Ryan Sowder's programming by Coach L. And if you're wondering where to get that, you can go to the show notes, find it there. But I want to read you all and L a quote to get his feedback on this. This is from Ryan. He says, talking about L, he was more worried about mindset, character, and the intent rather than qualifying for the games. It's like L, knew that if I took care of the small things, the big things would take care of themselves. L is the reason I qualified for the CrossFit Games. What's your thoughts on that?
Couple of things. So Ryan is the reason he qualified for the CrossFit Games.
I love you, but I agree with that statement.
I'm not taking credit for that one. That's all Ryan. He put in the work. So actually about the other thing is the training program. So to give everyone a little background about Ryan, he went to regionals twice, finished 35th and then 32nd, I think. But not a great experience for him, right? Like always felt like he underperformed. Mainly for external factors. So he goes to regionals twice and then decides he's going to join the military, goes and does his basic training, basically doesn't train for 8 months while he's doing his basic training. At the time, I was working with his brother, Zach Sowder. And so when Ryan was coming back home, he said, hey, I want to work with your coach. And that's kind of how we linked up. In our first conversation, he was talking about the games and all that. And I basically was like, let's just see how training goes first. You haven't trained in 8 months. Let's just see. So we did a 6-week cycle just to get him back into CrossFit. Then we went into testing. We did 2 weeks of testing after that. And then the cycle that's being released was his first actual cycle, which was an accumulation cycle leading up to Lowlands, the Lowlands competition, which is where he qualified for the games. But I think I can't take credit for his hard work. I think my message was simple. It was to basically get him to like believe in himself, and then being okay with whatever result happened, as long as he was satisfied with his effort and with his commitment in training, right? Because I think one thing that people tend to do is, like, I think we all tend to do this, is not give our best, not give our very best day to day. And then we have some big event or some big thing coming up. And then we show up to that and then almost like underperforming because we know that we didn't give our best in training, right? Like having that hanging over your head, like knowing that maybe you could have done more. Maybe you could have went to bed in time every day. You could have did a little bit better job with your nutrition. You could have given a little bit more effort and attention to your training. And I think that's part of the reason why people struggle in competition. So I wanted to remove all of that and just get him to a place where he was going in confident, and like regardless of the result, he was going to be satisfied with the entire experience. And I think honestly was the best thing for him, because the whole weekend he never had a reaction to a result, right? Like if he won, he was like, okay, I won. If he lost an event, he was like, okay, that's fine. Let's focus on the next one. So that's my thoughts on that.
Just a quick follow-up. It's something you said about that. You said sometimes it's, we have this big event and then we'll essentially make these excuses, right? Whether it was effort, whether it was sleep, whether it was this or it was that. I was having a conversation with someone the other day and I said, I think oftentimes as human beings, I know I've done this, we'll settle for mediocrity because it's believable, it's achievable, and in some cases, even we think it's what we deserve, is this mediocrity. And it's such an interesting place to be, to have a coach to guide not just the physical attributes, but sometimes the mental attributes, because it's often those 1% that often make the difference. And at that level, it's certainly what's between the ears,
Yeah, for sure. I think most of the things I focus on when someone's going to compete, like programming it's given. I know I'm good at that. I don't want to sound cocky, but I know I'm good at that.
Confidence, man. No, I love it.
And I know that I'm going to put my athletes in the best position physically to accomplish what they need to accomplish. But I think putting more effort in the psychological aspects of it is something that I've been working really hard on to improve. Because it's really hard to have like those really deep conversations with athletes and kind of like peeling back the layers of like why they think the way they do. And if you listen to some athletes, like there's layers behind like those subtle comments that until you like peel them back, like you don't realize, okay, that didn't mean exactly what they said. Like there's something underneath there.
As I kind of wrap up here, and I got one more question for you. Is there anything that maybe I didn't ask that you want to add before I get to get to our last question here, and then you can give people where to find you as well here in a moment.
No, I'm going to save my shout outs for the end of the podcast.
Okay. All right, deal. All right. My last $1 million question is this. If you could be remembered for just one thing, what would that one thing be?
That's tough. Oh, man. If you know me, you know I don't like attention. So my instinct wants to say not be remembered at all. But
oh, wow. It's like some Socrates stuff right there, man.
No, I would say just a genuine human being. I think the thing that I pride myself on is just being honest and genuine with all my athletes. And if I'm able to build a relationship with all of them beyond training to where if I see them at a competition, it's like we're excited to see each other, then I think I've done a good job as a coach. And I think with the exception of like one or two athletes, I think that's the relationship I have with everyone, where it's just the end of the road of us working together. And so I think just being remembered as a genuine person is what I would care for. Other than that, I don't really care.
Oh, the famous Coach L. Well, if you want more L-isms, where can people find you?
I'm on Instagram at _coach_L. Don't have a I have Facebook, but it's not a page or anything. Yeah, so just Instagram. If you want to work with me, go to the Brute Strength training page. You'll have to select a tier 2 coach. I am currently 3 athletes away from being at capacity, so do so fast. I will be at the West Coast Classic in Nevada, so if you want to link up, just shoot me a message on Instagram and we can link up in person.
And all those links, notes, resources, Ryan Sowder's programming, all that stuff, guys, can be found in the show notes. So if you forget all of that or didn't catch it, you're more than welcome to go there. Coach L, seriously, man, not only as a coach, but just as a friend, man, I really appreciate you. Really appreciate you being on here. This conversation was amazing for all the audience. Coach L didn't want to be on here. It's not that he didn't want to be on here. He thought he needed someone else as a distraction. I think that was a grand slam. Hopefully you got a lot out of it. And just want to say thank you again. I really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. One last thing. If you guys go to the Ohio Brutes Instagram page, they're selling shirts and they're trying to raise some money to support their journey to the games. So please show them support and go buy yourself a shirt.
And we're going to get them on there, on here too. So I'm excited about that. Thanks, man. And for all of you listening, thanks so much. And we'll see you next time.